Good evening. I'm Barry Holtz. I'm the Dean of the Davidson School. Delighted to see you all here. We've had a really exciting day at the seminary today. This day marks the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Teachers Institute, and we've had a lot of people in and out of the building today listening to a number of really interesting speakers, looking at many different aspects of the Teachers Institute. The Teachers Institute really gave birth to the List College, what is today the List College, and the Davidson School. And tonight, as the culminating event of this celebration, we're delighted that Rabbi Harold Kushner is with us to speak. It's my privilege to introduce the Chancellor of the Seminary, Arnie Eisen.
Thank you. It says a great deal about the character of JTS and the intentions of JTS from the very beginning that Solomon Schechter, from the day he set foot here, intended not just to have a rabbinical school, but to have a Teachers Institute. He knew that America needed a new vision for Judaism. He knew that there had to be rabbis to guide the realization of this vision. But he also knew that there had to be teachers, many of them, and heads of schools, many of them, imbued with a different vision of Jewish education, and that these people had to spread throughout North America if the vision of Judaism that Schechter wanted to propagate was indeed going to take root. And Schechter brought a brilliant young rabbi named Mordechai Kaplan to the task and gave him a remarkably free rein. And TI quickly took on the character of a center for what Kaplan called the reconstruction of Jewish civilization, not just of Judaism as religion, but for the reconstruction of Jewish civilization. Bible was a major topic at the Teachers Institute because the Bible was the founding document of Jewish civilization, and since Kaplan wanted us to live in two civilizations, Jewish and American, Bible, of course, was stressed also as the founding document of Christian civilization, and therefore of the Judeo-Christian culture. Hebrew was primary at the Teachers Institute as the language of the Jewish people and its civilization. Religion was taught in Kaplan's broad sense of religion as the developing set of norms and cultural traits and expressions of spirituality and transcendence that the Jewish people had developed over the centuries. And Kaplan, from the beginning, stressed the historical development of Judaism as part of what TI was going to imbue in its charges, because he wanted them to see their own role as developers of an ever-developing Jewish civilization. And finally, there was a stress on pedagogy, how to teach Bible and religion and Hebrew. Well, the Teachers Institute has given rise to many successor institutions and many organizations and many efforts like Prosdor and LTF and Camp Ramah. And we're fortunate to have with us tonight Rabbi Harold Kushner, one of the most noteworthy and significant thinkers in American Judaism today, who is a graduate of the Seminary College, which was one of the successor institutions spawned by the Extension Division of the Teachers Institute. But before we get to the remarks of Rabbi Kushner, I want to say a word about Bill Davidson, Zichrono Livracha, whose generosity enables us to carry on the work of the Teachers Institute through the William Davidson Graduate School of Jewish Education. It happens that by one of these coincidences, if you believe in coincidence, Bill's yahrzeit was this past Thursday. And so we want to take a few moments now to remember Bill Davidson, whose name the Davidson School bears. Now, I didn't know exactly how I was going to do this particular part of the program until on Friday I got an email from Bill's son, Ethan. And Ethan shared with me some remarks that he had put together on the occasion of stopping the period of going to shul to say Kaddish after 11 months for his father. And Ethan had been going twice a day to Shaarei Tzedek to say Kaddish. And at the end, Ethan thought about what it had meant to him to say Kaddish, and he, in a very rabbinic mode, pretty much decided to offer some very personal remarks based on a verse in the Mishnah, chapter 2. If you have studied much Torah, do not take credit for yourself, because that is what you were created to do. And he tells the story, Ethan does, of the security guard at Shaarei Tzedek, who one day, do you know this story? Who one day said to him, are you here because you want to be here or because you have to be here? And Ethan thought for a second and answered him, neither. The correct answer is that we say Kaddish, not because we want to or because we have to, but because this is what we are created to do. And he expounds in a very nice way, all the deeper because it's not done in heavy-duty philosophy or theology, but the words of a son who's just finished saying Kaddish for his father, that honoring our parents is one of the things that we're created to do. And we honor them, certainly by saying Kaddish for them, but we honor them by making sure that we're not only the son or daughter of father or mother, such and such, and not only born whatever it is we are, he says, a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, or whatever. We have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do with it? And the fulfillment of this potential stored up in us by the person who gave us life is part of the way we honor that person. Fulfilling that potential and putting it to work in the world is not something we do because we want to or because we have to, but because it is what we are created to do. I find this to be a very beautiful and profound reflection that gets to the heart of Jewish education, what TI has been about, and what the Davidson School has been about. I also have a great sense of privilege, having been born a Jewish human being. Not better than other human beings because born Jewish, but born with this particular set of inheritances, this particular set of potentials, this particular set of possible gifts that we can make to the world, to our society, to one another. And the fulfillment of this potential, to me, really is mitzvah. And the only way that potential comes to realization is that if each generation takes up what is stored in it by the previous generations, makes it alive, transmits it in a live way through education to the next generation, and inspires that next generation. Let's take the word inspire in this literal sense of passing on spirit to the next generation, to live it as only this generation can, but in a way that carries on faithfully what the previous generations had done. This is what was the mission of the Teachers Institute from the very beginning. It found itself faced with a crisis that Jews were coming here in their millions from Eastern Europe, and if nothing changed, they were going to leave behind the traditions of their ancestors and drop them whole when they came to this new country. And after World War II, I think it's fair to say we faced a similar crisis, when the question was, how is this people, this Jewish people, going to put itself back together after the horrors of the Holocaust and the war? And again, at the same time as Israel was being built overseas, we were building up a proud American Jewry, thanks to the efforts of Jewish educators like those at TI and JTS. And now we find ourselves at a third period in American Jewish history when there's a special need to carry on with this combination of continuity and creativity to do things not because, as Ethan would say, not because we want to or because we have to, but because our sense is that this is what we are created to do. This is the particular gift that we have to bring. This is the contribution that we can make to our society and to the world. Now, I wanted to say a couple more things about the Teachers Institute and its successor institution, the Davidson School. And so I asked our staff members to contact Rosemary to see whether Bill had actually left us some words that might be helpful in thinking about the future of the Davidson School. And of course, he did. So I want to take 3 brief sentences that Bill Davidson said in his remarks in recent years in various settings that are not particularly about the field of Jewish education, but are immediately applicable to what we're trying to do at the Davidson School. So I give you 3 remarks of Bill Davidson, which I think are very relevant to what it is we're trying to do here. We serve the construction and automotive industries two crucial segments of our economy that are undergoing dramatic change. I hope you know that Bill was major contribution as an industrialist was through a corporation called Guardian Industries, which started out making glass for automobiles and then extended to make glass for skyscrapers and all sorts of other construction projects. So we serve the construction and automotive industries, two crucial segments of our economy that are undergoing dramatic change. We seek to change and develop with them. In fact, to anticipate their future trends and demands and be ready to supply them with the materials they need, sometimes even before they know they need them. If ever there was a motto for Jewish education and the demand for Jewish education right now, that is it. We are facing a rapidly changing world, so rapidly changing that we know that all the proud institutions we have created, including the JTS has created over the past century, are no longer serviceable. They're not going to be able to live up to their potential because the world around them has changed too rapidly. And we face the difficulty and the challenge, we have the blessing, of trying to prepare educators at the Davidson School now, not for the educational reality of 2010. That would be hard enough, considering how changed things are. But for the educational reality of 2020 and 2030 and 2040, when hopefully these professionals will still be out there doing their jobs transforming American Jewish life. And we need to prepare curriculum materials. And if we give the curriculum materials of 20 years ago, 1990, before internet, those materials are by definition outdated. And we know that if we give only the curriculum materials of 2010 and don't teach people how to develop those materials further for coming years, they're quickly going to be just as outmoded as those 1990 materials are going to be in an age of digitization and rapid change in every area of technology. So the job at the Davidson School is to prepare teachers who know how to be learners, who are so grounded in their tradition that they're able to transmit it and to change it as they go while keeping its essence, not losing hold of what's precious in it. And that's a very special kind of educator indeed. It's one thing to train an educator who knows how to transmit a text, the same text they've been using for 30 years. I know when I talk to my kids about what they read in high school English, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, almost entirely the same reading list that I had when I was in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. This is not going to work anymore, and we know it because of what Bill said there about industry is really applicable to us. Point number 2. Not only is it a combination of science and technology, research and development, but it is a combination of both the history and our future. The futuristic products and processes developed in this building will allow our customers to reach for their own distant horizons. Our ambition is to be the imagination station of the glass industry. We aim to be the imagination station of Jewish education. We want to do things in this building at JTS, in the Davidson School, that will allow the students and the faculty of this school to reach for their own distant horizons. That is what we are here to do, to empower young people, to educate them in this classical sense of eliciting something from inside of them, bringing it out of them, which is what education means in its etymology, and to enable them to reach for their own distant horizons thanks to the imaginative power that we grant to them by putting them in touch with their own tradition and especially their own tradition ways of education over the century. We are here today in the 21st century as American Jews because Jewish educators had this kind of imagination in past periods of Jewish history. And if we bring that kind of imagination to the task, as we hope to do, there's no doubt that we'll have Jewish educators in the 22nd century and the 23rd century who can face their own set of problems, which will leave to them, but how to take the Jewish tradition forward. Finally, here's a sentence that I love to hear from the owner of the Detroit Pistons, the only owner in professional sports who had 3 championship teams in 3 different leagues in the same season. A good team owner is an owner who realizes that his future is tied to the future of the league. Those who are very selfish about their own franchise miss the boat. I love the fact that Davidson School is a non-denominational school of Jewish education. We're not going to be concerned only with one franchise of Judaism here. We are concerned with the whole shebang, the whole enterprise. We know the whole league matters to us, and we know that this league is in connection with all sorts of other leagues. We're here to train Jewish educators who are going to reach out beyond any one movement, and in fact beyond Judaism and the Jews themselves, and be in touch with the world. We're trying to train people here who are going to be educating citizens, educating contributors to the larger world. And that is part of the basic structure of the Davidson School, that it was founded as a school devoted to conservative Judaism, but not only conservative Judaism, it's a school who knows that its future is bound up with the future of other franchises and other leagues. It's a great metaphor for the Davidson School. And I only wish that we could have Bill here with us today to know how much his gift is meaning to generations of American Jews and beyond America who have been influenced by the many people who have already come forth from this building, from this school, and will come forth from it in years to come. So Karen, I hope that we can somehow commune with Bill and let him know that we're doing good stuff here, and we're grateful, and we're going to carry it on. And I think if he were here, as I know he was when Barry and I met with him last year, he told us how proud he was of what was going on at the Davidson School. I hope he'd be prouder still if he was able to see it here in the flesh and know how we're taking it forward. So thank you for being with us, and I thank Bill for all that he has done. And now it's my pleasant task to introduce for Bill Davidson. Thank you. It's my pleasant task to introduce a man who in this setting needs no introduction. And if you needed one, Rabbi Harold Kushner's biography is in the brochure in front of you. I would just like to say that in terms of the Davidson School, when I reread a book like When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which I just looked over again today in preparation for this talk, the gift that we're seeing here is really an educational gift. What Rabbi Kushner has done is take the wisdom of Jewish tradition, show that we are not just Jews, we are Jewish human beings, and therefore there's an immediate connection between the wisdom of our tradition and the wisdom one has as a human being, and without all sorts of footnotes. In fact, I think there's not a single footnote in this book, which is one of the great features of the book, I say as a scholar, takes Jewish tradition and distills it in such a way that you keep the richness of that tradition, but it comes out sounding like human wisdom, which is just as relevant to any human being, no matter what their tradition is. And we know that Rabbi Kushner, who has served as a rabbi in a congregation for many, many years and has written many books and articles in the Jewish world, can do the Jewish thing when he wants to. In fact, I would say that one of Rabbi Kushner's recent articles on the relationship between mitzvah and kedusha, commandment and holiness, is, in my humble opinion, destined to be a classic. But we also know that Rabbi Kushner has the ability to translate the wisdom of Judaism, beyond a Jewish audience, in a way that reaches out to the larger population with the wisdom that attempts to answer questions like, when bad things happen to good people, or how good do we have to be, or how does one know how to live a life that matters? So without further ado, I'm privileged on this 100th anniversary of Teachers Institute to introduce you to one of the alumni of one of the successor institutions of the Teacher Institute, the Seminary College, Rabbi Harold Kushner, who is going to speak to us this evening about the TI, the Teachers Institute approach to interpreting sacred text. And Rabbi Kushner, you should just know that several years ago at a faculty meeting, I dared to say that there was a JTS approach to sacred text, and the faculty was not receptive to this notion. How could there be one JTS approach to anything? So I'm anxious to hear the Teachers Institute approach to interpreting sacred texts. I give you Rabbi Harold Kushner.
Chancellor Eisen, thank you for that very generous introduction. If it was your intention to say those nice things about me as a reward for letting myself get talked into this, It was worth it. When the Chancellor called me and invited me to speak at this centennial celebration of the Teachers Institute, my first response was, I think you got the wrong guy. I never went to the Teachers Institute. My mother was a graduate of the Teachers Institute. She studied with Mordecai Kaplan in the 1920s, even as I did in the 1950s. My brother is a graduate of the Teachers Institute, one of the first products of the joint program, former president of the Teachers Institute Alumni Association, and probably the one who ought to be giving this talk. My wife's sister is a graduate of the Teachers Institute, had a very distinguished career as a Jewish educator in several communities. I never went there. I went to the Seminary College, which was the adult extension a couple of nights a week. And I started to say to the Chancellor, you know, it's really not right for me to be the keynote speaker there, because my experience at the Seminary College was a non-professional one compared to all those people who were preparing for careers in Jewish education. But even as I said it, I realized that wasn't true. My experience at Columbia and at the Seminary College is what impelled me to a life of Jewish service. There was no joint program when I was an undergraduate at Columbia, so I put together my own. I did my undergraduate work during the day at Columbia, and then I came to the evening courses here because, you know, I'd been going to Hebrew school after my regular school since I was 7 years old, and I wasn't about to stop. And Columbia, being what it was in the 1950s, the Seminary College were the only co-ed classes I was taking then. And two things happened to me while I was here. First, I made some very good friends. I would come to class here in the evening, and I would see some faces whom I would recognize the next day in my freshman courses at Columbia. And we became close because we realized we had this serious Jewish commitment in common. And we would stay up late at night talking about problems of being Jewish and problems of maintaining that Jewishness in the secular world. And those conversations were very formative for me. But more than that, the experience of the teachers I was exposed to. I was 16 years old, and I was studying Jewish philosophy and theology with Abraham Joshua Heschel. Didn't appreciate it at the time, but you know, the seminary itself didn't appreciate Heschel in the 1950s. Studying Bible with H.L. Ginsberg, who was a great Bible scholar and a wonderful mensch, and who became my mentor for my doctoral work. All of those experiences led me to this career in service to the Jewish people. And the synergy between what was happening to me in Columbia and what was happening to me in this building turned me into the approach I have, and I'll share with you this evening. I was fortunate to be exposed to the core curriculum at Columbia, the idea that there are things an educated person should know, whether or not they are useful in your life's work. And I remember the first introductory session I ever had to my contemporary civilization course. The professor said, look at the assignment and look at the title of it. And if the title is The Economic Organization of Monasteries and Nunneries, read the assignment with that in mind and not looking for information about the sex lives of monks and nuns, whichever may be more useful to you in your chosen career. I just finished reading Louis Menand's book on the marketplace of ideas, which is all about the interaction of the humanities and professionally oriented courses. And Menand writes, liberal education exposes the contingency of present arrangements. That's educators speak for saying, how did previous generations deal with questions of life? Because the questions have been there for a long time. And there is a lot of useful stuff you will get from that. Again, Menand, the divorce between liberal education and professionalism, that is, courses that prepare you for a career, rests on a superstition that the practical is the enemy of the true. In other words, non-professionally oriented courses can be eminently practical. They can teach you things that you will want to know later in life. When our daughter left for college, the last thing I said to her was, you're not going to college to learn for a career, you're going to college to become an educated person. And when you become an educated person, find somebody who will pay you for that and they will teach you how to do your job. And along those lines, the courses I took at the Seminary College, the evening branch of the TI, originally, which I thought of as Torah Lishma, turned out to be life-defining. Columbia, in its core curriculum, taught me to read text for myself instead of reading secondary sources. We actually read the classics instead of reading about the classics. And we were taught to ask ourselves, what was the author saying? And that was an immensely valuable experience. But it was incomplete. I needed the dimension that Seminary College gave me when it taught me to ask not just what was the author saying, but what is the author saying to us today? Between the two, I learned to read ancient texts not only without presuppositions, but thanks to Seminary College, to read them vertically, to read them through the lenses of all the generations of commentators. How can you read Torah without Rashi and think that you understand Torah? And when I committed myself to share in the creation of the Eitz Chaim commentary, that was exactly what I was trying to do. If you're familiar with it, the Pshat commentary that Chaim Potok did so masterfully is the answer to the question, what was the text saying? What did these terms mean in its time? And the Drash commentary, which I had the privilege of writing, asked, what can it say to us today? Let me give you some examples of how this approach works out. To read a text with fresh eyes, without presuppositions, without having to start with the idea that somebody else tells you what this means. The very first chapter of the Torah, the creation of the world. I don't have to take it literally and affirm that 37 centuries ago the world was created in 144 hours, and I don't have to reject it as a fairy tale. I can see, reading the text, that it's the story of bringing order out of chaos, of the incremental emergence of higher forms of life. Just about 1 year ago, I recited Birkat HaChama, the once every 28 years bracha you recite when the sun rises on a Wednesday morning, which is supposed to be exactly when the sun was created on the fourth day of creation. Now, what was I doing, aside from the fact that something that happens once every 28 years, I'm not going to blow it? What was I affirming when I recited the bracha for the reappearance of the sun on the anniversary of its birth? I didn't literally believe that. I was saying something about what a marvelous, intricate world is that we live in, and I want to put that into words, and I want to use traditional Jewish language to put that into words, because I will never come up with words as profound as the bracha we recited a year ago. Because I could read the text without presuppositions, and because Columbia in its humanities program asked me to read Plato's Symposium, I am absolutely convinced that Genesis chapter 1 or 2 does not say that Eve was created from Adam's rib. The text does not say that, and I will challenge anyone to disagree with me on that. The Hebrew word tzelah, translated as rib, 20 times more often in Torah means side. And what you have in Genesis is the biblical equivalent of the myth that Plato gives us in the Symposium. The first human being was a set of conjoined twins, one half male, one half female. When God, go back and read that story, see how much better it reads this way. When God realized he could not find a mate for this hybrid, this Prius kind of human being, he caused it to fall asleep, cut it in half, not a rib, cut it in half, closed up the flesh where he had incised, and when Adam wakes up and sees Eve, he says, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. And therefore does a man leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they become one flesh." My guess is, in the 2nd century of the Common Era, Judaism and Christianity alike were repelled by the decadence of the Roman Empire, and that's where the misogyny comes in, And that's where the putting down of women comes in, both translating Eve derived from Adam's rib, and all those embarrassing statements, which fortunately we don't have to be embarrassed by, in the New Testament about the distraction that women provide. I could never have read it that way if I did not have the benefit, first, of the classical education at Columbia to ask me what is the text saying, and secondly, if I didn't have the benefit of the seminary education to ask me what can the text say to us. Similarly, and I won't get into it now, I have a book-length discussion of it. I read the story of the Garden of Eden, and I don't find any original sin. I don't find that eating the fruit was wrong. God never calls it a sin. God never gets angry at Adam and Eve, gets angry at the snake. God does not punish Adam and Eve. He tells them what the consequences of their gaining the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil will be. That is, we develop a conscience, and things which are natural for other creatures become problematic for us. To Eve, he says, childbirth, which is so easy for other animals, is going to be the most painful thing you will ever experience. I will not insult the intelligence of the women in the audience here this evening by saying that I have a sense of what it must be like to give birth to a baby. I don't. I will insist, however, that the real pain of being a parent is not the moment of giving birth. The real pain of being a parent is the night you give your daughter the car keys and stay up to make sure she gets home safely. No other mother animal has to do that. By the way, did you notice, if you read the Hebrew text carefully, where God says to Eve, in grief, be'etzev tel dibanim, 3 chapters later, the Torah uses the same word for God, vayit'atzev, when he sees how human beings have disappointed him. God, like a human parent, experiences the frustration when his children don't grow up the way he hoped. And for Adam, what he says is, you're going to have to earn a living. Animals don't earn a living. Animals go out, look for food. If they find it, they eat and go to sleep. If they don't find it, they go to sleep hungry. They don't have to go to graduate school. They don't have to be evaluated. They don't have to worry about being downsized. Life is much easier for them because they have not eaten the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Give you another example. This one is close to me because just a couple of months ago, our granddaughter was bat mitzvah on Shabbat Shira, Parshat B'Shalach. Right after the crossing of the Red Sea, we read, Vayavo marata v'lo yachlu lishtot mayim ki marim hem. They came to the place called Marah. They tried to drink the water. They couldn't because it was bitter. Is it the water that's bitter? Ki marim hem, or are the people bitter? I suspect it's the people. What's interesting is, just the previous chapter, right after they crossed the Red Sea, they pledge, the Lord will be our God forever. 3 days later, they're already complaining about the accommodations. What we learn from that is that forever is a technical term meaning 72 hours. Somebody promises to be grateful to you forever. Some guy swears he will love you forever. You can hold him to it for 72 hours and don't push it beyond that. The lesson is, no matter how spectacular a miracle may be, it wears off in a couple of days. To keep faith alive, we need a small miracle every day or two, rather than a big miracle once in a generation. But the lesson I really like is right after that. If you remember the text of the Torah, people can't drink the water because it's bitter, or they're bitter. God shows Moses a branch. He throws it into the water. It sweetens it. There is a beautiful midrash on that text. It pictures Moses saying to God, Ribono shel olam, why did you create brackish water in your universe? What good does it do anybody? Who needs it? Is the world any better off because of it? And how does God respond to Moses in the midrash? He says, you know, this is not a time for theological discussion. Those people of yours are thirsty. Do something to sweeten the water. And that is an idea which is very close to my heart. Confronted with misfortune, The task of the religious leader is not to explain it, but to sweeten it, to make it more bearable. And if there is one idea in which I have invested my entire adult life, it would be that. I meet so many people who said, "Oh, Rabbi, I love your book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People." And I say, I don't mean to nitpick, I never wrote a book by that title. It's not why, it's when. I don't want to get involved in why. It's fruitless. You know, you argue, whose fault was it? It's when. What do you do when it happens? The challenge to conservative Jews, the challenge to contemporary Jews of whatever affiliation, is what do we do with texts we venerate but are troubled by? And it's something I never would have been able to deal with were it not for the conversations I had in dormitories and hallways and the insights of some of my teachers in this building, Mordecai Kaplan most preeminent among them. Give you my favorite example, the Natana Tokef, the prayer at the heart of the high holiday services when we chant, Rosh Hashanah Yikatevun V'Yom Tzom Kippur Yechatemun. And I don't know what to do about that because I don't believe it. By the way, when it comes to how do you deal with texts that you are troubled by, I'm reminded of the midterm exam I had in my humanities literature course in Columbia. 2 questions. First question, of all the books we've read this year, which one did you appreciate least? Second question, to what limitation in yourself do you attribute this inability to appreciate a classic? When my book came out, and I was invited to half the synagogues in America to talk about how God helps us deal with suffering, inevitably, the first question I would get after my talk was, what about what we say on Rosh Hashanah, that it's decided on Rosh Hashanah and confirmed on Yom Kippur, who shall live and who shall die, that the God does make these decisions. In the beginning, I said, oh, in my shul we say it in Hebrew and hope nobody understands it. Couldn't get away with that forever. So how do you approach a text like that? Give you a couple of possibilities. One, a literal approach. Yes, that is what we believe. You don't like it. This is what Judaism teaches. God ordains. God is the director, and we are the audience waiting to see how it comes out. That's what the prayer says. You want to be a traditional Jew, that is what you say at 10 minutes after 11 on Rosh Hashanah. Second approach, not literal, but archaeological. This is what our ancestors used to believe, and in tribute to our ancestors, we repeat their words, although we don't use them any more than, we don't believe them any more than we use the implements that archaeologists dig up in the suburbs of Jerusalem. Third approach, pseudo-literal. We don't believe it, but we say it anyway. It's printed, we're not going to change it. Fourth, judgmental. This is obviously not the way the world works. I reject it. Let's skip it. Sounds extreme. I remember this is what my teacher Mordecai Kaplan tried to do with Kol Nidre. He was so upset. He was so concerned what the Gentiles would think if on Yom Kippur we say we don't have to keep the promises we made, that he wanted to get rid of it. His congregation overruled him. And the import of that experience was Dr. Kaplan was taught by his congregants the first rule of Reconstructionism. What the people sanctify becomes holy. He should have taught them that. They taught it to him. Hanukkah, you remember when we light the menorah, we say, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu ladlik ner? What does it say in the Torah we're supposed to light Hanukkah candles? Obviously no place. The Jewish people fastened on that. The way the Jewish people fastened on the secular story of Esther with all of the murder and the nudity and the sex and everything else, and because we love it, it became sanctified. So that's the judgmental one, a little hard to get away with. The last one, I think, is an open-minded one with a preference for generosity. Give the tradition the benefit of the doubt and try your hardest to find something in it that you can affirm. The way I tried to do a moment ago with the Genesis story, the creation of the world. Not take it literally, but take it seriously. So many generations have responded to it. What is it they were responding to? And now when I introduce Natana Tokef on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this is what I tell my congregation. I say, are you bothered by that line? It is determined on Rosh Hashanah and confirmed on Yom Kippur who shall live and who shall die. Good, I'm bothered by it too. But you know how I read it? I notice that the prayer comes in two parts. Did you ever notice that? The first half, Natana Tokef, says, the books are opened and the entries are in our own handwriting. V'chotam yad kol adam bo. Meaning, half the things that will happen to us in the coming year are the result of choices we make and actions we perform. You eat the wrong things, you don't take care of yourself, you will get sick. You drive while texting, you will have an automobile accident. You cheat on your taxes, it will catch up with you, or on your marriage, as the case may be. You won't get away with it. Half of what's going to happen to us this year is the result of actions we undertake. And then the second one, Rosh Hashanah Yikatevun, the other half of what's going to happen to you this year is no fault of your own, but the result of actions other people take, or things external to you. Sometimes you're in an automobile accident because you're on your cell phone. And sometimes you're in an automobile accident because you did nothing wrong, but the other driver was on his cell phone. And this is life. That I can believe. That I can affirm. And that makes sense to me. But I could never have come to that conclusion did I not approach my congregational responsibilities as the beneficiary of the Columbia liberal education and the education in depth, with the emphasis on giving the tradition the benefit of the doubt while still trying to see things in it which may not be visible on the surface. This, I would maintain, is the challenge, the ongoing challenge for a conservative Jew, for a conservative rabbi, for a conservative educator, to enter into the soul of old laws and old stories, not only into their words, but into their soul, neither affirming nor rejecting, but listening with an open mind and heart, asking not only what did it mean, not only what does it mean, but what can it mean to me today? I remember one of my earliest memories growing up at the Brooklyn Jewish Center with a Silverman prayer book, and when the services were getting, to my early teenage mind, a little bit boring, I would reread Robert Gordis's introduction to the Silverman prayer book, the classic statement of Jewish reproach to liturgy. I don't remember a whole lot of it. I remember the last line. And if you grew up with the Silverman prayer book, you may remember it too. Dr. Gordis's closing line, Hayashan yitchadesh, hechadash yitkadesh. The old will be rendered ever new, and the new will be sanctified. And that, it seems to me, is the mindset with which we are invited, indeed obliged, to approach the sacred texts of our tradition. Amen, ken yehi ratzon, and thank you.
We have some time for questions. Would you like to field them yourself? I think you have some experience at this.
Do this all the time. There's a story I like to tell when I invite questions and nobody raises his hand. For a couple of years in the early 70s, I was invited to teach one course a semester at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. They had just gotten the grant for a Jewish studies program. It wasn't enough for full-time faculty because full-time faculty need telephones and secretaries and pensions and stuff like that. But, you know, if you had the right number of degrees on your wall, they would invite you to teach the one course. I would drive from my home in Natick, Massachusetts to Worcester every Tuesday and Thursday and teach from 11 to 11:55. I'd finish my lecture and I'd invite questions, and every Tuesday and Thursday the same thing would happen. There was a young man sitting in the front row who would raise his hand and say, "Will this be on the final?" The other thing that would happen on Tuesday and Thursday was, if I finished my lecture within 5 minutes of the dismissal bell, there were never any questions. So, if there's something you would like to respond to, challenge, or clarify, here's your chance. If you are in a hurry to get home and see what's on television, I will certainly understand that and not be offended. Yes?
Who would claim that the story of Agag and Amalek was not biblical, but added by somebody, some other, and refused to read it? Are there texts that so trouble you that you can't reconstruct them, that you can't find meaning, and you simply refuse to read them?
Gee, what an interesting question. The answer is no, because I'm simply not capable of passing judgment on a biblical passage like that. I will say I don't like that. That makes me uncomfortable, and the story of Agag is as good as any. By the way, you know the Louis Jacobs story about that? Rabbi Louis Jacobs was one of the prominent members of the British rabbinate. He was in line to be Chancellor of Jews College, which is a stepping stone to be the next chief rabbi. Some of the right-wing people there were a little bit concerned about his level of frumkeit, so they threw this question at him. Do you believe, when God told Samuel to kill all of the Amalekites, including women and children, do you believe that God said it? Jacobs answered, I believe Samuel heard it, but I don't believe God said it. He did not get the appointment to Jews College. He never became chief rabbi. That's sort of my attitude. I read a story. I'm troubled by it. I see it sometimes as a relic of an earlier age. The Bible, of course, written over the course of so many years, so many generations. But I'm not prepared to skip it. I say it with discomfort. And I'm open to the possibility that somewhere down the road, somebody a lot smarter than me will come along with an interpretation of it, which will make it at least morally acceptable. I'm not going to say I'm more humane than the text of the Bible. All I can say is my biblically trained conscience shudders to read those words, and I wish they weren't there, but they are, and I have to recognize that. Yeah, Lenny.
First, I want to compliment you. Terrific part. And one of the passages that I know troubles a lot of people is made so rare or no read, by way of example. And the contempt, how can you possibly, even admit, how can you possibly have a text that contemplates that parents would bring their child to the judges for capital punishment? But then, when you read, I was wondering whether you might want to address our rabbinic heritage with respect to texts
Sure.
like this, because it's not one. This one in particular, you look in Sanhedrin, there are passages in Sanhedrin. This passage troubles our rabbinic forebears, the Chachamim, as much as it does us. And in the end, they look at it and they find so many exceptions to it that, one of the, I forget who it is, but says that it never happened and it never could happen. But beyond that, so what's it doing in the text? So I was asked this, my secretary actually asked me, he said, there's the passage, I understand you Jews have a passage in the Torah that you can murder, you can inflict capital punishment on your child for obstinacy, for being zolel disobey.
All right, Lenny, let me give you three answers. You could choose whichever. Yeah.
The answer I gave was, listen, look at the text closely. It talks about, it concludes with the passage that the people should look at whoever the place, people should look and be afraid. I look at it and say, this is a very, anyone who's had a teenage boy would know that you need to deter this abominable behavior of teenage boys.
It's a rather drastic way of dealing with it. Okay, Lenny, I'll give you three answers. You can choose whichever one you like. One, I'd be interested in taking a survey of parents of adolescents as to how many of them find that reprehensible and how many of them understand it perfectly. Two, I had the occasion a little over a year ago to debate Christopher Hitchens on the whole question of the value of religion. Does it do more harm than good? And one of the things I said to him is, you know, if I wanted to write a book critical of medical care in the 21st century, I could find a lot to take issue with. I would not have to stoop to criticizing medical practices from the 9th century as being benighted. You want to argue about the harm religion can do, talk about 21st century. Talk about what people do today. Don't give me this stuff that's thousands of years old. But probably the most thoughtful approach is the one that you've given us. We are not the first people to be troubled by that. The rabbis say, one, it's a hypothetical example. It could never happen. They say, two, look at it in the context. He'd say it starts with going to war, taking home a female prisoner captive, having children with her, deciding you don't like her, neglecting the children grow up neglected, et cetera, that the fault of the parents in the way they raised it turned into that, and they have to face the responsibility. And third is to hedge it around because we don't have the freedom that the Supreme Court of the United States has to declare a sacred text no longer applicable. They're stuck with it, and so they hedge it around with the parents have to testify, which means they have to come together, they have to agree, they have to say we spoke to him, you know, they have to say he heard us, he saw us, that, you know, all these grounds for getting out from under it. To know that the rabbis were troubled by this too, I think should teach us to approach the Torah seen vertically through the lens of the generations with a lot higher level of comfort than the person who simply takes a Bible off the shelf and reads that chapter of Deuteronomy. Right, if there's one more, I'll take it, and otherwise, you got it. No.
People quote Heschel a lot, and spirituality is part of the zeitgeist. And they don't quote Kaplan very much in this generation. Kaplan was your teacher, your mentor. What would you say is the abiding, lasting, enduring contribution of Mordecai Kaplan that every generation needs to hold?
I quote Kaplan all the time. By the way, on spirituality, let me share with you something brilliant that our colleague David Wolpe of Los Angeles said. He said, spirituality is what you feel, theology is what you believe, religion is what you do. And he dismisses people who say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. What's the enduring lesson of Dr. Kaplan? One that has been so universally accepted that people don't realize how revolutionary it was when he taught it. That Judaism is more than a religion, more than a theology. It embraces everything that Jews do. We are a community. That's why we love Israel. If the Bible was only a theological statement, it wouldn't need a homeland. It could just sit on a library shelf. A people needs a homeland to live out the way of life in the Bible. The idea that, and my Protestant friends can't understand this. Catholic friends understand a little bit better. You can have a Jew who doesn't observe anything, never goes to synagogue, disregards the holidays and the dietary laws. His voting pattern, his charitable pattern, his educational goals, his ethos are shaped by the fact that he is Jewish and he knows it. The idea that these people are Jews also, that we don't only define ourselves by our ritual performances, that is so obviously right that all branches of Judaism have accepted that, and they don't always remember to give Dr. Kaplan credit. So on remembering that he was the founding dean of that institution whose centennial we celebrate today, and taking note of all the people from the Davidson family to the teachers, to the administrators, to the students and the alumni, who are constantly infusing this institution with fresh blood so that at age 100 it has not become sclerotic and outdated. We owe them all, the Jewish people owes them all, a word of thanks. And thank you all for being here for part of that.
Thank you, Rabbi Kushner, and thank you all. It's been a long but really rewarding day, and May Esrim, we can say. We're now at 100. We'll go for 120, and then we'll see from there.